Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Quantum Bridge with myself, Casper, my co-host, as always, Gary, and really pleased to be also welcoming a brand new guest. But rather than trying to steal Gary's thunder, as I always seem to be doing, I'll pass over immediately. And Gary, please get the show on the road.
Thank you, Casper. Yes, we have a new guest by the name of Stephen today. Welcome to the show, Stephen. How are you doing?
Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Hello there. I'm good, thank you. Yes,
good.
Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah. So was different for me because normally a lot of our guests come via online in some way or social media, and meeting you is actually in real life. I mean, this is back to the old school. So, so I will say, it was one of the rare occasions I had to go to the bank, and I was walking down the high street in town, and this thing sort of on a notice board, a public notice board, this thing was flapping, and it caught my eye, and I was like, got to go to the bank. And I had that little voice that said, no, you got to go and look at that thing that you just caught your eye. So I had a look, and it was for a talk that Stephen was doing. Which actually, when I first contacted Stephen, he was fully booked, which is great as well, that people are interested in the type of stuff he was talking about. But by chance, there was a gap in the end, and I was a last-minute guest to his talk. So that was very nice, and that is how I met Stephen, who does go by the name of the Metaphysical Cowboy as well. So, Stephen, to start, why the cowboy? Where's your hat?
Yes, I haven't got a hat. I'd like a hat, but I feel like you have to be born there and raised as a cowboy to wear a cowboy hat, otherwise you're cheating. That just came about because I started a website, and I wanted to keep it slightly separate, and with online identities and everything, I didn't want everyone knowing all my details, and the stuff I was writing about, some could say it's a bit controversial, so I started Metaphysical Cowboy. One, it just sounded good. Then the logo came out of it, and metaphysics, I can't say I'm an expert, but basically it means beyond the scene, which is what I'm talking about all the time. So it seemed to, it just landed on Metaphysical Cowboy, and I like it. So I love America, and I love America.
Yeah, so, we're quite big into the States ourselves, so we like that on a lot of levels.
So these the talks you've been doing, I mean, how long have you been doing those now? I mean, you could call them sort of self-help type stuff with anxiety and depression. How did all that come about?
Like any of these things, none of it's planned. I think that was the one you came to, because it was in a new venue. I think that was my 9th one.
Okay.
And I'd been doing them in the Crystal Shack in Malden, which only holds, maximum I could fit in there was 13. But I know the lady who owns it, Teresa, and she was brilliant. She said, use it, you can have it for free. And so, because I didn't know what to, basically I was in, did you know of the Stand in the Park?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well,
but feel free to, if for people that don't know about that, just in case there will be people watching that don't, feel free to give a potted sort of overview.
Well, I'm not originally from this area, and I've been living in Brighton and Hove for the last 20 years. Now, I sold up with the plan to go and live in America, but that's been delayed. So my mum lives in Malden. So I was meant to be staying with her for just a few months before I sold my flat, sold all my belongings, prepped everything, stored everything ready to go off, and it all got delayed. And I won't go into details of that, but basically I was in Malden, and I wasn't planning on being in Malden. So I just wandered into town. I knew I was going to be here a lot longer. I'm not living there now. I've rented a different place. I'm in a different area now, but I'm still in the vicinity. And I just wandered around Malden. I didn't know anyone, I'm not from here. And I just got chatting to a few people, and someone mentioned the Stand in the Park. Now, because of the conversation we were having, they guessed that I was awake to what was going on. So this was, I think, just over 2 years ago. And I'd already been, just a little background, in Brighton and Hove. I don't know if we want to go into that later, but basically I'd been what you would call a conspiracy theorist since 2010. So I thought, well, I'll go and meet the local, what now, everyone calls the local conspiracy theorists. So I went to one Sunday in the park, which is a group of people who meet, if you don't know what standing in the park is, who were suspicious of the lockdowns, the vaccinations and stuff like that. And they wanted to meet up and basically get together because the world was going a little bit crazy. And I think it's a little bit of solidarity and meeting like-minded people is very comforting. So I went along and I got to know all them, and a lot of anxiety was going on. And, I got to say, I was the most excited. And I think that, I freaked a lot of them out because a lot of them were newly, starting to witness what was happening. And that maybe the powers that be in trusted institutions didn't care as much as they once thought. And I said,
it's a very nice way of putting it.
Yes. But it's a slow process as well, and I was in awe of them, to be honest. They're people who have, there was mainly pensioners. A lot of them were pensioners, like the youngest down to 21, I think the oldest up to 80. And they've done 180s on their belief system.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
And especially at the time, you were actually persecuted for it. If you didn't wear a mask, or if you didn't get the jib jab thing, if you spoke out against it, that there was an onslaught. When I became a conspiracy theorist, didn't matter. No one knew. I'd go about my business.
Nobody cared, really.
No one cared. You was just that person who said silly things every now and then, and no one believed you. But there was no real persecution, so I was in awe. And they'd all go, "Oh, we don't know as much as you." And I'm going, "But I tell you what, you've got some balls to do it now." That was I was impressed. But a lot of anxiety went along with it. So I used to speak to them all individually. Like, I used to feel my role was there not to was to G them up and get them optimistic rather than down in the, "Oh my God, this is terrible," which is frightening for some people. Some people handle it okay, others it frightens them. And there was a few in particular that, suffer from anxiety, and they tried different things. They did like sound healing, breath work. They were trying to yoga, and it still wasn't really touching the anxiety. So I said to a few of them, if I did a little talk on how to be present, which ultimately deals with anxiety, because if you're in the present moment, you're not worrying about the future, or living in your past. Would you be interested? And a few of them went, "Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. So I just did it. And I think the first time there was about 10 people turned up, and they were all from the group. And then it's just each, month I've done it. I've grown it, and some of them have dropped out because they didn't, it wasn't interesting to them. And they, to be honest, it requires your participation. And so it's just grown and grown. And I started putting posters up, came up with a name, Art of Presence. And yeah, it's just grown from there. So the last one, I think we had 20, I think it was over 20 or 21. And 60% of them, maybe more, I didn't know. They were new. And there's been some people.
This in itself is encouraging, Stephen, isn't it?
It's amazing. Honestly, I get blown away by that many people that are looking. And I don't get into the conspiratorial stuff, and I've said that on a couple of my blog posts that if someone asks me, I'll talk about it, personally, but I don't want to, leave anybody out. So I don't care what their views are. Like when I'm in that room, like I said it in that talk, I said, I don't care. And I thought, well, that's not true. I do care, but within my own friends, I like to share values, and I know I'm in good company. But when it comes to strangers or people coming to my group, I don't care anyone's views, I really don't. But yeah, they're all coming. And I think, interestingly, they all go to my website, most of them. So they do see what my views are on certain things, and some of my background is in there. So I think a lot of them coming, I haven't lost any, let's say, from reading my website, which is good.
Yeah, definitely. But that's why you're here, because we both read your website as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned that, you was down that sort of conspiracy thing 10 years ago or so. Was that at the same time as what we would call a spiritual journey or an awakening, or was it different times?
Well, interesting, like we were just talking before we came on, and Casper said, people say, when you wake up to this dream, let's say, I do think there's a dream aspect to what we live in. but I'd always been that way, always quite philosophical, always asking the weird questions, bit more emotional, and then that gets knocked out of you. But it was there. I think, like you say, it's always there, and it gets knocked out of you by, school system, specifically the school system, because that's where we all get it bashed out of us. And I went to like an all-boys school in Dagenham, which was, luckily, it was such a shit school. They left me alone. I didn't.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for that, Stephen.
Yeah, I didn't have to do homework. I got kicked out of so many lessons that they should just stick me in art. So really, I'm self-taught. All I got was reading and writing, not particularly high standard. I was dyslexic, which I think all helped, because I think the programming just didn't stick. It just didn't work.
Absolutely.
So I've been introduced to sort of conspiratorial things quite regularly through my life, and I went, no, piss off. That's awful. That's just, why would you want to know that? Why would you know that? Really, I've been the other side of just like, it scared me, so I didn't want to go there. And interestingly, two people I'd worked with back to back who I'd employed were both conspiracy theorists, sitting there reading David Icke or Graham Hancock. And it was interesting. It was knocking on my door and I didn't want to go near it. And then I think I had a breakup, and it shattered my ego, let's say. It didn't break my heart. It shattered my ego, and it left me lost for a while. And then just, as these things happen synchronistically, I played drums in a few bands in Brighton, and I met this other band, and they asked me to join them, and a few other really interesting little tie-ins, and I ended up rehearsing with them and joined their band. And I didn't know they were called Hollow Moon, and they were basically a conspiracy band, and their songs were bloody best band I'd ever been in, but I had no idea what the songs were about. And it was like, there was one called Edgar Casey. I didn't know what they were singing about. There was like, so I'd go home, and back then in 2010, the internet was pretty free. You could Google stuff and
Absolutely.
go down rabbit holes.
You could find pretty much anything.
Yeah, and YouTube would feed you more of the same. And so I got into just by researching what they were talking about. And honestly, it was the best way, because they didn't shove anything down my throat. They were just talking around me, and they were all talking about, they were all conspiracy theorists. And so I did like a deep dive for 2 years, and simultaneously that sort of helped me understand, similar to probably yourselves, that, oh God, I'm not the mad one. No wonder I've always felt a little bit odd in this world. This stuff, it didn't scare me. It didn't shock me. It almost felt like I bloody knew. I knew there was something else going on.
More like a confirmation than a revelation.
Yes. Good example. And then, to be honest, 2 years of the old school, Max Teague and David Icke. I was listening to Red Ice Radio, Veritas, all of these things. And, I was bombarded with all this, and I'd be working away I work from home, luckily. So I'd just be having it on in the background, listening to all sorts of fantastic talks on all different subjects.
Did you listen to Bill Cooper?
No, I didn't listen to Bill
Cooper. Okay, his book, Behold a Pale Horse, and
yes.
And the Bill Cooper shows they were sort of one of the mainstays of that sort of time. That's the only reason I mention it, along with people like Jordan Maxwell and whatever. But obviously David Icke. But I just wondered, because he had quite an effect on me, Bill Cooper.
I mean, I look back on it quite nostalgic, because it was easy. Like, I said, the people who are waking up now, it's a lot harder. Like I could, I had all the time in the world to, digest this, and it was all old conspiracy, really. You were really doing history, why did it, what happened, how did we get to where we are? Whereas now they're just in it, and they're waking up in the middle of this thing, and I'm in awe that they're handling it as well.
Yeah, we often say, by the way, Stephen, that we are. At the time, it was very difficult to be, quote unquote, I don't really like the term, but quote unquote awake during that time. I'm sure you'll feel the same about it, probably anyway. But, that was a lonely experience, but it meant that you had time to assimilate this different paradigm and to get comfortable, at least to some degree, with the fact that things weren't as they've been presented to you. To have that happening in an instant now, and then of course the judgment of us who have moved forward, and we probably all been guilty of looking back on some of these guys and thinking, oh, come on, blah. When actually I totally agree with you. This would be a really, really condensed timeline to quote unquote wake up on. So yeah, I think it's really good you're shining a light on that, because we often, those of us who are at a different wave or phase of this, it is very easy to look back and sort of judge. You know?
It is, and I caught myself doing that, and being present and trying to practice what I preach. Every time I see something that I criticize or compare or do, I point it back at myself. And honestly, it's the only way out of it. But, in answer to, so I did the conspiratorial stuff. And to be honest, I had even that easy because I was in a band with 4 other conspiracy theorists, and then they introduced me to more. So I didn't have that lonely period of being the only one in your like I had a ready-made network who, when, I got on with, I must say a lot of the old school ones, they were a bit weird. And, whenever there was a protest or something about chemtrails, they'd turn up and they'd have egg stains down their shirt. And I'd be like, why are they always the weird ones? Why are they?
I know.
And
those are the exact ones that then get interviewed. And then the whole sort of quote unquote movement looks like, they always find the one who's, I don't know, wearing a branch in their head or something. And they'll have a chat with them who've just said that they've just come back from Jupiter. And maybe they have, who knows? But they're not necessarily the ones that you want to be public facing, are they?
And I looked relatively normal. I worked in advertising. I was in advertising for 25 years, and so, but so really after about 2 years, and it didn't mean I just dropped it, but I sort of had done a bit of a deep dive into lots, I won't go into stuff, but, the stuff to be chilled, there's a lot to go on, and I was like, that's pretty dark. Now, what do I do? The question I asked myself was, what can I do? Because I can spend another 10 years researching this stuff. And everyone goes, it's just information, it's just learning. But I wasn't happy with that. I've never been a scholar or an academic. I didn't want to just, drench myself in information and do nothing with it. So I ended up, asking that question, and then there was a guy on Red Ice Radio back then. So that was in 2012, I think. And his name was Neil Kramer. And I don't know if you've heard of him. He like esoteric, conspiratorial and spiritual. And he was talking about divine will on this interview. And I had no idea what he was talking about, and he's a northerner from England. So maybe because of the familiarity of the accent, I was like hooked. And I listened to that interview twice because I was like, I have no idea what he's talking about, but it makes sense. There's something in that I want to understand. So I ended up just, following him, listening to his talks. And then I went out to one in 2014 in upstate New York, and then met all these people that were similar to me. And it was the first time I'd ever sort of put myself in it. And he was all about conduct, your conduct. And he talked a lot about Hermeticism back then. And the idea that the all is the mind of God, all is mental, made sense that this place is, we try and give it names, and you go through all the different religions and spiritual teachings, and they're all pointing to to the thing that this is not what we think it is. And then it put the responsibility back on me. If I want to change the outside, then I've got the only sense that came from like Jung, Gurdjieff, all of these teachers, the Tao Te Ching, the Hermetic 7 principles, 7 Hermetic principles, they all made sense to me because they were asking each one of us to be responsible and to change ourselves. And then it was just a journey of who am I?
Absolutely, yeah.
Who am I? Who am I to change? What am I changing? This is a question, like what? And then, subsequently you get these highs, and then you get the lows, then it all flows, and then it loses it. And I think that's all part of it, because you get helped at the beginning. I'd definitely say there's a little boost when you discover all this new stuff and you see how your life improves. There's like a 2-year nice upward arc, and then you feel like you've dropped, but you haven't. You've just plateaued, and then it's requiring you to put in a bit more effort.
Well, it's a bit like any other physical relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not dissimilar from a relationship with.
It is a relationship.
Yeah.
It is a relationship, 100%.
Yeah.
is. And the more you know, that period of where it gets jaggedy and, you know, anxiety and depression come out is on purpose for you to see what you need to address. Because, you know, I'd say a lot of people, especially at the moment, are jumping on these spiritual things and doing all this. And honestly, they're all great. I love that everyone's doing them. I think everyone should do more of them. But to be honest, for me, the groundwork, like when, as they say, the rubber hit the road, is when I actually started looking at myself. Because there's a lot of pointing out there that this person's bad. They should be doing more. Why are they doing this? That doesn't do shit. I hate to say it, it doesn't do shit. But knock yourself out, because I did it, and everyone has to do it until you realize it's fruitless, you know. So
like I say, these seem to be familiar stages that we go through and look back on, and then we see other people in that sort of space, and we're like, yeah, I remember that, you know. It's yeah, I've seen that quite a lot.
You can get stuck in it. You can get stuck in it for a long time.
I think the perfect example, or a perfect example maybe, of that sort of thing is, I don't know if you've read Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, the Gurdjieff work.
You've got to be a brave man to read that one.
Yeah, well, precisely. That was really my point, is that when you're reading words like heptaparaparshenok and you're 400 pages into some Gurdjieffian wonderful but diatribe of some kind, you do suddenly have that moment of self-reflection where you go, is this just a massive joke that's meant to make me give up and go inner? And I'm not trying to take that journey away from anyone. And I think that's a particularly fascinating tapestry of work. But there is always this thing that it feels like you're sort of being knocked on the head. Look, that's all wonderful stuff, and there's nothing against any of it, any of this esoteric stuff or deep stuff or rabbit holes that we go down in the quote unquote conspiracy factual world. But you know, there is a lot to be said for turning that eye inwards.
I mean, honestly, it just naturally suited me because I love information and I love listening to audio. I've got lots of books, but I'm much more audio preference. But the idea of being a scholar and just researching and research, I would just get one little bit from a book from Gurdjieff. And actually, I read the Ouspensky one, you know, In Search of the Miraculous, which
was a great book. Yeah,
it was much more helpful because it was someone else sort of.
That's right. And also he cut through a lot of the Gurdjieff and sort of hyperbole, really. So.
Yeah. But I would take one bit. I'd literally be reading it. And if I took the whole book, I'd be lost because you'd forget the beginning by the time you got to the end because there's so much information.
Yeah.
So any advice to anyone out there, if you're reading any spiritual text or self-help book or anything just take the one bit that resonates and go and do it. Go and do it and see if it works, because
Gurdjieff was all about doing the work, so that actually is a very appropriate statement, and I totally resonate with what you just said.
Because you know, even the Hermetic stuff, it's pretty simple really, but you could spend a lifetime on each one of them principles because they're so brilliant. But I would literally just hear it, get excited like a kid, and I'd go out and just sit there and practice this stuff of like, well, what is it like to always, you know, Gurdjieff was always remember yourself in every situation, which is basically being present. And, you know, Eckhart Tolle, when I heard about listening with the body, what the hell's that? And, you know, if you think you're lacking, give everything that you think you don't have. You have it. I'd go, well, what does that mean? I'm missing intimacy. I'll go and give it, but not in the sense that people think, but just to truly listen and be intimate in someone's presence is a thing we don't do. So I'd say all these teachings are amazing, but you only practice of them is the key, you know?
Yeah, the doing. There's nothing, you know, the fact that you've internalized a whole load of this stuff, if you don't make that apparent, if you don't shine your light in the world in some way, then so what?
Yeah. It's just information, you've absorbed information. It's got to be embodied and practiced. And honestly, the practicing, get it wrong, and I think I've got it right, and then I realize I've just been bypassing something, and that's all part of it. But if you don't try and practice this stuff, you wouldn't ever know, you know.
Yeah, I think there's an element there of being guided and trusting that process, like where you say that you've only read like a portion of something. And I
Yeah.
think you mentioned in the talk as well that sometimes you pick up a book and you just like, oh, you just throw it aside and then you come back to it and then it suddenly makes sense. There's an element of being ready, and it will be presented at the right time, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Because like I think I mentioned the Kybalion, and I read that, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, made no real sense. I was just like, oh no. Right. And then about 3 years ago, picked it up again and thought it was like a breath of fresh air. I was like, oh my God, this book is so simple. It's beautiful. It's so, so concise. So I wasn't ready for it at the time, So, but yeah, the being present and the art of presence, and why I accidentally, I just did it for a few friends to help with their anxiety around this period of time. But the more I started looking at it, and I kept thinking, well, I want to move into other subjects, and I thought, do you know what? There's no other subject, because if you're not in your present moment, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing breath work, yoga, Pilates, like tarot reading, whatever, if you're not present, then I'd say you're using your mind for it, and it's an imagination thing rather than what is actually coming through you. I'm convinced that the presence is the deepest topic you could possibly have, because it covers everything.
Well, also the thing is, as you just rightly pointed out, everything else is projection, right? Even your past, never mind your future, but even your past is a type of projection. So all of these things, and the way that we in the West particularly probably come to things like yoga as well, it's with a view of what you're going to attain from that yoga in the future. And so even that starting point is sullied by the fact that that's, I don't want to say what it is or isn't for other people, that's up to them, but I just say it's maybe worth looking at actually what it's really about.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, it's you feel like you're poo-pooing these things. I'm not. They're amazing. I've done them all myself,
Yeah.
But they didn't touch when I've finally gone inwards and I'm still in the process of clearing out a hell of a lot of shit. Every time I think I've got rid of it, there's more there. And, and that only comes from being present and accepting and allowing whatever situation comes up. If you feel something that's not necessarily positive from that situation, or neutral, let's say neutral is the better of, the positive or negative is neutral is where you want to be. And that doesn't mean boring. It just means that you're accepting it as it is. If I get either one or the other, I have to go, what was that? What was that? That wasn't clear. And I try not to judge it. I do, but I try not to. And then I sit with that feeling, and it's very revealing. You usually find out that it's either a lack. Honestly, everything comes down to worthiness. We're all suffering from this chronic disease called unworthiness. We are. And that's why the world is in the mess it is. And I did want to say, because I know we haven't got long and I'm rabbiting on, but for anyone who's listening, who's newly or, and people don't know what to do. I know what that feels like. And you want to go out there and convert, and that is, people don't know that word, but that's what I was trying to do at the beginning, is drag them through where I'd gone and they didn't want to. I'd gone through that door, as someone quite wisely said, and I was trying to drag them kicking the screen with me, and they didn't like it. So then you go, well, I need to, I think I was a bit wiser than, or I don't know why I didn't fall into a lot of the traps, but the protesting, signing petitions, all good. But if you really want this world to change, and I think it already is you work on your inside. And as above, so below, as within, so without. I've had micro proofs within my own life that every time I change something within, the outside changes. Every time. Without doubt. If it doesn't, that means it's still in me. So if anyone's wondering what to do to help this world become a better world, it's you go in. And if anyone wants help on that, you can find me, or there's plenty of other people doing it. But that's the way this world gets better. And I honestly think the world is getting better at the moment because there's more people doing it. There's more people genuinely looking at their insides. But I also want to caveat that with, if you feel compelled to go to a protest, if you feel compelled to go and, do anything, do it. Because if you've got a feeling to do it, then you need to do it. So Like, I know people have gone to different protests and met people, amazing people, and it's led to other things. So I don't mean don't do anything, but if it's out of fear or anger and these things, which anger's a good one, but if it's I'm frightened, therefore I'm angry, then that's a different thing. You know, if it's out of love of something, do it. If it's out of fear, maybe question why you're doing it, you know?
Yep, I agree, and a fantastic message to finish on. So thank you very much, Stephen. I think it's great the work you're doing to help people and bring it, you know, offline into the real world, get people meeting and talking. So keep up the good work, and hopefully,
Thank you very much.
And consider coming back, Stephen. I know, you know, I often say this, but we really have only scratched the surface. So thank you very much, mate.
Thank you. Honestly, hope to see you again. And yeah, take care, Casper and Gary. Lovely to meet you. Take care.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
Stephen. Thanks, mate. Bye.